Good morning and welcome to our channel. Today, I'd like to discuss some disability options for those of you that participate in Section 8 programs or have a housing choice voucher. So, we're going to talk about the different types of help you can get. And then I also want to briefly discuss what it means to be disabled and also apply to utilize federal housing or Section 8 vouchers. So, before we get started, my name is Jay. I'm the owner of Section8Consulting.com. And today, I'd like to present a little bit of information about our company and then we'll move on to the actual video. I'm going to move my face off to the right here. So as you can see, we have a phone number, we have a company web address, and an email up there. My office is strictly by appointment, and those appointments are reasonably priced, okay? Very low. So moving on from there, if you have learning disabilities or want to keep up with the video and I go a little too fast, you can always reference our notes in the comments section and the description as well. So let's talk about the definition here. People with physical and mental disabilities, along with developmental, intellectual, sensory disabilities may qualify for Section 8 housing, and also in vouchers, and have additional rights under federal disability and fair housing laws. However, having a disability does not automatically guarantee a voucher. It isn't necessarily going to make you go quicker on a waiting list because there is a high level or number of people that have disabilities, right? And so first question that's most commonly asked is, can a person with a disability qualify for Section 8? Absolutely. It's really contingent on the household's annual income, household size and composition, meaning number of people in the household, your citizenship, and whether or not you have an eligible immigration status in the U.S., whether or not you have criminal history and program screening requirements. Keep in mind, guys, they don't really like to see felonies in the last 5 years, and they will not do business with anybody that's been convicted of anything to do with illicit drugs like methamphetamine, if you're a registered sex offender or otherwise, okay? Um, Moving on from there does not necessarily have to receive SSI or SSDI. So, let me be clear, guys, the Social Security Administration and many of you guys pursue a disability payment or already receive it. That's one way to automatically guarantee that you can prove a disability. But keep in mind, if your disability is different, HUD is a different federal agency. It does not have quite as stiff requirements to prove disability. That means a lot of you out there that would be able to get a disability payment could qualify as disabled under HUD's programs, okay? And so we're going to move on. Does disability provide a waiting list priority? Absolutely, in many cases, but they call these preferences in housing authorities, okay? Preferences are things like being a domestic violence victim, being disabled, a senior or veteran, even homeless. And so the more of those you stack together, the greater preferences you give. Disability is one of the top three, in my opinion, out there outside of homelessness and domestic violence, of course. And so every public housing authority will establish its own waiting list preferences under federal requirements. The PHA can offer some of these people with disabilities, older adults, people experiencing homelessness, veterans, people displaced by government action or disaster, people that live and work in the jurisdiction, and residents leaving institutions or at risk of institutionalization. And so an applicant should request a PHA's waiting list policy and then also its administrative plan. And you can do that by doing a Freedom of Information Act, better known as a FOIA, and request a digital copy of those policies to help you better understand how the housing authority procedurally addresses both preferences as well as wait times and whether or not it's a lottery, and of course, your rights and responsibilities. Number three, reasonable accommodations. Well, on the tenant side, if you receive a voucher or are in housing at the federal level, there's roughly, I think, 140 different types of accommodations that you could request. So there's a veritable number of them. And there's to be on frank with you, you could request an accommodation regarding just about anything, but there are some that are more common than others. And then don't mistake the concept of landlords, because they also can be served with a reasonable accommodation known as modifications. And there's roughly 200 that I can think of that will qualify there. If you have trouble building out an accommodation or writing or composing that letter to meet federal rules or arguing nexus with it, which is where you're establishing how that would affect your disability, improve your situation if approved, you might want to reach out to my office. We offer accommodation letters for clients that have generally a better success rate than those of you that tend to use boilerplate copies off Google and AI, okay? So possible Section 8 accommodations include assistance completing an application or recertification, communication by email, large print, telephone, relay service, or other accessible format, allowing a representative, family member, or advocate to assist, a remote meeting instead of an in-person appointment, reinstatement to a waiting list when disability cause a missed notice or deadline, additional time to submit documents, an extended voucher search period if you were not adequately able to use it because of disability or health issues, approval for a living aid, permission for an assistance animal, disability. Disability related exception under payment standards, which would increase your payment standard if you have a medical necessity to be closer to your provider or doctor. Changes to and transfer of inspection, briefing, or recertification procedures. Sometimes, because of health or otherwise disabilities, you may not be able to meet all the appointments required, and sometimes PHAs will inevitably send you a letter for a notice to terminate services. So in that case, you can usually rebut those attempts through informal hearing and then procedurally follow the requirements. HUD specifically identifies accommodations such as extra bedrooms, assistance animals, and additional search time, and also accessible communication and allowing applicants to remain on a waiting list for disability related failure to respond. So, it's important to go over HUD's Fair Housing and Non-Discrimination Guide, which I'm going to link up for you guys. And again, all these notes and comments will be in the comment section of the video as well as the description. So, number 4, how to make an accommodation request. I'm not going to get too deeply in that, but I will discuss some portions of it. A request should explain the specific accommodation being requested, that a person has a disability, how the disability creates a barrier under the existing rule, how the requested change would address the barrier, whether the supporting verification from a knowledgeable professional is available. Let me give you some advice, guys. Accommodation requests can be quite complex because they typically require a lot more information than most of you are willing to actually put in there, and they need to meet very specific rules. I understand everybody wants to save money, but honestly, when it comes to accommodation requests, because there's such a low approval rate, I would really advise reaching out to a qualified professional or even my office regarding this. Okay, the housing provider may request reliable verification when a disability or disability-related need is not obvious. Verification might come from your physician, therapist, social worker, case manager, nurse practitioner, rehabilitational professional, or otherwise person familiar with your individual limitations. And so now we're going to move on to extra bedrooms. This can be a quite contentious subject matter because PHAs will fight very hard to not approve these, but under certain limited circumstances, a person may request an additional bedroom when it's necessary because of a disability. And I'm going to go over some examples real quick. An improved living aid, disability-related medical equipment, separate sleeping arrangements when medically necessary, overnight disability-related care, and treatment or therapeutic equipment that cannot reasonably be accommodated elsewhere. Keep in mind, this list is non-exhaustive. In other words, we could probably cover about 200 to 300 under that list, okay? But to better help you guys, I'm going to put up the HUD search and leasing handbook. That's going to help you a little bit in that respect. The PHA may also periodically confirm that the bedroom continues to be used and approved for the purpose. HUD's current housing search guide discusses additional bedrooms for living aids, medical equipment, and disability-related overnight care, again, under HUD search and leasing guidebook. And I would definitely take a look at that. It will be linked. Also, number 6, and one of the most common ones is for living aids. A qualifying family member may request a living aid when the person is essential to the care and well-being of a household member with a disability and is not obligated to support that person and would otherwise live in the unit except to provide necessary support services. And let's talk about the inclusionary here. The PHA must provide a living aid when necessary as a reasonable accommodation. PHA may screen the proposed aid. The aid is not normally treated as an assisted family member. The aid's income is generally not excluded from the household income, and a qualifying living aid normally considered when determining the appropriate unit size. Moving from there, the occasional rotation of caregivers does not automatically qualify as resident living aids. And if you want to take a look at some of the federal rules and policies and procedures, you can look under the linkage we're going to put for Title 24 CFR, meaning Code of Federal Regulation, Part 982. Now we're going to move into voucher extensions. There's going to be a lot of reasons for that. People that have disabilities, otherwise mobility issues, and many other issues may not be able to use their search time or because of health related matters or hospitalization. So, voucher extensions become very paramount to your case. So, a person with a disability may request additional time to locate an appropriate unit when disability related barriers interfere with the housing search. Let me tell you how this is really going to work out. In most cases, they're going to give you 1 to 2 months search. If you're not able to really use that search wholly, you can request an extension, which will likely be about 2 months. Now, when you do this a third time, it's going to be very difficult to get that approved. So, search times can be about 3 times, and it may not exceed a total of 6 months. So, if you get 2 months, 2 months, and 2 months, that's the limit of what they're going to be able to offer you. You're going to find it pretty tough after the second extension in 4 months. Moving on from there, so these examples are a shortage of wheelchair accessible units, hospitalization or treatment, difficulty traveling to view care, a need for particular bedroom configuration, delay delays arranging supportive services, and communication of cognitive limitations affecting the search. So you see, there's a lot of reasons there. Now, moving on from a higher payment standard, accessible units located near medical facility care or may cost more than a regular voucher payment standard. A family may request a reasonable accommodation exception under that payment standard. The PHA may approve accommodations based on a payment standard of up to 120% of the applicable fair market rent prior to HUD's approval. And if more than 120% is necessary, the PHA may have request a HUD approval, and HUD Bash has additional authority in certain circumstances. Keep in mind, payment standards can differentiate between low income properties, affordable properties, tax credit properties, Section 8 vouchers, and I can think of roughly 130 types of vouchers and housing programs on the market, not including or excluding those under federal rules. So, with that, I'm going to close out with number 9, and that will be assistance animals, meaning emotional support and supportive animals that are approved by a medical professional. To be clear, there's been some changes in federal law, so I'm going to keep the pretext for the advice at a minimum. So, an assistant animal is not necessarily a pet, depending on circumstances. It may be a trained service animal, an emotional support animal, another animal that performs work, provides assistance, or offers disability related therapeutic support. A qualifying assistance animal may be approved for as a reasonable accommodation. Ordinary pet restrictions, deposits, fees generally cannot be imposed on or approve assistance for that animal. The tenant can still be responsible for actual damage caused by the animal. And so we move on to our last, and that will be accessible housing and modifications. This is more in respect to you dealing with a landlord and requiring modification that would not grant um, a higher burden financially for them or administrative burden, which means extra work for them. And so a voucher holder may search for housing that meets disability related accessibility needs under Title 24. Depending on the property and applicable law, the tenant may also request reserved accessible parking, ground floor unit, transfer to an accessible unit, grab bars, and other physical modifications to both the bathroom and exterior of the home, and a ramp accessible entrance, changes to the door hardware, and accessible mailbox or communication aids for hearing and visual disabilities. And so, who pays for the physical modification depends on the housing program, property, and funding sources, and applicable federal and state law. And a reasonable accommodation changes a rule or procedure, and reasonable modifications typically changes to the physical property that's being rented. So that being said, I'm going to include the rest of these notes in both the description and comment section. And I apologize if I've gone very quickly, but we try to keep our videos short and as concise as possible. So I've enjoyed talking with you guys. We do live videos on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. Those are our lives, and then we do EDUs or pre-recorded videos twice a day, most other days. I've enjoyed talking with you guys, and I wish you guys all the best with your disability-related search for housing and applying or exercising your rights under federal rules. Have a great day.